South Korea will hold a special summit on November 25th in Busan to commemorate the 30th anniversary of its ties with ASEAN. By hosting the special summit, South Korea would become the first country to invite ASEAN and host the event for the third time. South Korea and ASEAN have first established dialogue relationship in 1989 as they have signed sectoral dialogue partnership. Since then, the two sides have upgraded their ties twice more, establishing a full dialogue partnership and comprehensive corporate partnership before agreeing to become strategic partners in 2010. Established in 1967, ASEAN stands for Association of Southeast Asian Nations and currently consists of 10 nations in the region, including Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. The ASEAN population totals 650 million, the third largest in the world, and is also becoming a big player in the stagnant world economy, registering an average of 5 to 6% growth each year. The relationship between South Korea and ASEAN has improved since President Moon Jae-in unveiled a new Southern policy. Last year, the trade between the two sides had amounted to nearly $160 billion, the largest amount ever. To mark the 30th anniversary of the bilateral ties, South Korea is preparing an event bigger than the two previous summits. It would also feature the leaders of South Korea and 10 ASEAN nations, as well as other high-ranking officials, economic leaders, and others. The world is setting its eyes on what new visions would South Korea and ASEAN be able to propose through the special summit.
Hello, welcome to The Point. I'm your host, Daniel Che. From the new Southern policy to a special summit in Busan, efforts to build on the already strong ties between South Korea and ASEAN member nations continue. Today, we turn to a number of experts to dig deeper into this special tie that dates back 30 years and also to look ahead to the future of this relationship. So, let's get to the point. And to help us dissect today's subject into digestible bites, we're joined in the studio by Dr. Lee Jae-hyun at the ASEAN Institute for Policy Studies, a senior fellow of the Institute. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our topic is, of course, the South Korea ASEAN Summit and the special relationship the two sides have. This isn't the first time. This will be the third summit. And what does that detail about the relationship the two sides have?
As you just mentioned, this is the third special summit between Korea and Southeast Asian countries, combined ASEAN. And it's quite meaningful in a few senses. First of all, South Korea is the first country that hold the special summit for 3 times. The ASEAN countries have a special summit to celebrate their anniversary, like 10th anniversary, 20th anniversary, with their dialogue partners. And South Korea is one of the dialogue partners, but this special summit, South Korea holds a special summit every 5 years. That shows the Southeast Asian countries together has some kind of commitment in developing relation with South Korea, as much as South Korea is interested in deepening bilateral relations with Southeast Asian countries. And particularly, this summit has a few other meanings. And first of all, as you know, the Moon Jae-in government announced what we call New Southern Policy. It's a policy designed to ASEAN countries. And with this summit, this special summit, it means the end of New Southern Policy 1.0, the first phase of the New Southern Policy. And with this special summit, the government will announce the New Southern Policy 2.0, the next stage of the summit. And another interesting point with this summit is that there are a lot of cultural festivals around the summit. As you can imagine, the summits are just a meeting among the leaders, top leaders of the countries. And ordinary citizens don't know what's going on inside the meeting room. But in this summit, there are a lot of cultural festivals around Busan City where the summit is held, and the people can enjoy and participate in the summit, and taking the opportunity that the Southeast Asian culture can be introduced to Korean society.
So it looks like they are concerned about making sure there's more involvement
of
from various levels, whether it's preparations or actually taking part in the summit itself. How do you reflect back on 30 years of ties between South Korea and ASEAN members that led to this point?
These 30 years of history of relations between Korea and Southeast Asian countries, I could say that there are 4 distinctive stages. The first stage started in 1989, exactly 30 years ago. That's why we are celebrating the 30th anniversary this year. And the South Korea was the only developing country that accepted as a dialogue partner of ASEAN at that time. The ASEAN countries coined a special term called sectoral dialogue partner for South Korea. And within 2 years' time, South Korea was upgraded as a full dialogue partner. That's the kind of first stage of the relations development. The second stage starts with the Asia financial crisis and the establishment of ASEAN Plus 3 and East Asia Summit. So since then, bilateral relation between Korea and ASEAN developed in the context of a multilateral cooperation, like ASEAN Plus 3, EAS, and later ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting, plus that kind of multilateral cooperation. And the third part is what I call the consolidating stage. From 2009, the first Korea ASEAN Special Summit, and we had another one in 2014, the second Special Summit. And in this period, Korea and Southeast Asian countries built a strategic partnership, and we signed bilateral FTA with the ASEAN countries. So this is kind of a consolidating part. And the last one starts with the Moon Jae-in government. Moon Jae-in government announced New Southern policy. The policy is specifically designed for Southeast Asian countries. So this is kind of a new era. That is kind of a summary of the past 30 years of relations development between Korea and ASEAN countries.
All right, Professor. Dr. Lee, we'll take a little break now because we have a special clip prepared. South Korea has been establishing ties with ASEAN in various sectors. We have a clip that highlights what the two sides have achieved over the past 30 years.
As South Korea and ASEAN mark the 30th anniversary of their dialogue relationship, ASEAN is grabbing headlines as an emerging force in the global economy. ASEAN is a national federation with a population of around 650 million people. Its total GDP stands at nearly $3 trillion, and its total trade values around $2.9 trillion. ASEAN is logging an average of 5% annual growth since 2010. It is becoming one of the major players in the world economy, as it is registering 3.4% of the world's GDP and 7.3% of the world trade volume. Since establishing dialogue partnership in 1989, South Korea and ASEAN are establishing a robust economic partnership as well. As a result, the trade between South Korea and ASEAN is rapidly growing. The bilateral trade volume reached about $160 billion in 2018, up 7% year on year. 2 years ago, the figure stood at nearly $150 billion. The people-to-people exchange between the two sides is also growing. ASEAN has become the biggest tourist destination for South Koreans. In 2015, around 7.5 million people visited each side. In 2018, the number of mutual exchange reached almost 11.5 million. South Korea-ASEAN relations have further improved since President Moon Jae-in addressed his New Southern policy in November 2017. South Korea recently signed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement in Indonesia, the third biggest trader among ASEAN. South Korea and ASEAN are expected to continue strengthening their ties moving forward.
The ASEAN market is the most promising one. How would you rate Seoul's accomplishments so far in terms of cooperating with the region in various sectors, including people-to-people exchanges or the economy?
Well, according to the statistics, in 2018, the bilateral trade stands at the 160 billion between South Korea and Southeast Asian countries. And the Southeast Asian countries combined is the second biggest trading partner of South Korea. And what is more important is that the South Korea realized a trade surplus in Southeast Asian market. And annually, we are having like 40 $40 billion trade surplus in Southeast Asian market. So the Southeast Asia is a very important partner for South Korea's economic growth and future prosperity. And when it comes to social cultural and P2P, people-to-people exchange between Korea and Southeast Asia, we have annually 10 million people mutually visiting between Korea and Southeast Asia. That's a lot of that's quite a big number of people visiting each other, and that's 1/5 of whole South Korean population. And what is more, there are more than 20,000 Southeast Asian students studying in the tertiary education institution in South Korea. This is quite important because these students, when they go back to their own country, they could be employed in the government as a kind of top decision makers, and they are key players in those society, and that's quite crucial asset for South Korea in the future. And of course, as you know, there are numerous migrant workers in South Korea coming from Southeast Asia, and we have a lot of marriage migrants as well. So as South Korea is becoming more multicultural society, our partnership with the Southeast Asian countries are quite important. And I don't have to mention K-wave again. The original source of K-wave is Southeast Asia, and it's still very strong in Southeast Asian countries. So, and it is not just economically important, but at the same time, with the K-wave, South Korea's soft power is becoming stronger and stronger in Southeast Asian countries. So these are kind of the achievement we have done in our partnership with the Southeast Asia. And if you look at the statistics of economic cooperation, exchange, and social cultural cooperation, Southeast Asian countries, ASEAN, is more important than the four major powers that surrounding Korean Peninsula. If you compare trade, investment, people-to-people exchange, in many cases, ASEAN countries are more important than Japan, Russia, and as you know, the New Southern Policy goal is to elevate Southeast Asian countries in our foreign policy agenda. And I would say ASEAN is already within four major partners of South Korea.
Looks like some very clearly distinguishing factors there. It's time for us to extend our conversation. We'll be joined by another expert. So let's bring in a guest from Singapore, the second biggest trading partner to South Korea among ASEAN members. We connect to Waqas Adenwala, Asia analyst at the Economist Intelligence Unit via Skype. It's good to have you with us again.
Hello, good day. Thank you for having me over at your show today.
Well, thank you for making time for us, Waqas. First of all, could you describe the relationship between South Korea and ASEAN members?
Sure. So South Korea and ASEAN have a very close, cordial relationship. In fact, since Moon Jae-in came to the presidency in South Korea, he initiated the idea of having and developing further strong ties as part of his New Southern Policy. So in the past few years, ties between South Korea and ASEAN have improved dramatically. Obviously, South Korea is also supposed to host the commemorative summit at the end of this month in the city of Busan. So that will happen between the 10 states of ASEAN and South Korea. And obviously, there are rumors that potentially even North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was hoped to make a visit. That obviously remains unsure, but there were chances that he might be appearing as well at the summit.
So how big is the size of the trade market between Singapore and South Korea at this point, and what is the potential for further growth?
Absolutely. So if you first look at how big the trade is between ASEAN and South Korea, and then compare Singapore, it will give you a reflection of how important Singapore is in the whole scenario. So bilateral trade between Singapore and South Korea is roughly around $20 billion, both ways, exports and imports, whereas the whole bilateral trade between South Korea and all ASEAN states is around 160 billion US dollars. So despite being a small city state, actually Singapore has been pulling a lot of its weight. It has actually got a big lion's share of roughly around a tenth and even a bit more of that bilateral trade between South Korea and ASEAN states. And yes, going forward too, Singapore obviously is one of the trading hubs in the region. It is obviously a transshipment hub. So yes, there's definitely a lot of potential for trade to grow further between the two countries.
And how do you foresee the Seoul-Singapore relationship building further from here on?
So in general, South Korea and Singapore maintain strong ties. If you see how Singapore's foreign policy works, their motto is to make sure that they're neutral and maintain close ties with everyone. So yes, Singapore knows that it has a big place in the trading routes of the world. It wants to make sure that its place as a trading hub remains strong. South Korea obviously is a big exporter of a lot of global items, but also in general, a very close state in terms of its Asian proximity. So yes, I do definitely see more room for improvement between the two nations. Singapore will obviously maintain a neutral stance. So obviously we don't think South Korea will take a precedence over any other nation from Singapore's perspective, whether it's bilateral or foreign policy perspective. From trade perspective, yes, definitely a lot more potential for two countries to even improve the ties further.
All right, thank you, Wakas, for your time and your contribution today. We appreciate it.
Once again, thank you for having me on your show. Have a good day.
Coming back to you, Dr. Yi. Speaking of multilateral pacts and deals, South Korea is trying to sign FTAs with ASEAN nation, each ASEAN nations to be specific. Last month with Indonesia, we agreed on CEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. Do fill us in on the potential of this agreement.
Let me just explain the FTAs we have with ASEAN, individual ASEAN countries first. Of course, we have Korea ASEAN FTA, and on top of that, we already signed Korea Vietnam FTA, as well as you just mentioned, we basically made agreement on Korea Indonesian FTA, and also the Korea Malaysia, Korea Philippine FTAs in the pipeline. And the Indonesia, as just mentioned, Korea and Indonesia made an agreement on what we call CEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. And Indonesia is one of the most influential countries in Southeast Asia, and it is also the biggest country in Southeast Asia in terms of territory and in terms of population. And it's a huge market with the population of 250 million. And of course, given the level of economic development, the purchasing power of the Indonesian people is a bit limited. But nevertheless, given the size of the population, there is a huge huge size of middle power in Indonesia, and that is a good market for South Korea. And also the Indonesian Jokowi government is putting so much emphasis on developing infrastructure, and that's good opportunity for Korean companies to do some project and invest in infrastructure project in Indonesia. Yeah, in that sense, the Indonesia is a good market and a promising economic cooperation partner for South Korea.
To delve deeper into the topic, we're going to extend our conversation to another expert that's joining us. Now, let's have a chat with an Indonesian economy expert. We are joined by Hal Hill, HW, Arndt Professor of Southeast Asian Economies at the Australian National University via Skype. Welcome to our program.
Okay, hi, and thanks for having me.
All right, Indonesia and South Korea are actively engaged in bilateral trade. How is Jakarta viewing its economic ties with Seoul?
Well, Indonesia and Korea, that is South Korea, have long established relationships. They're in the same hemisphere. Their economies are very complementary. That is, Korea is a manufacturing exporter. Indonesia is a natural resource exporter. Indonesia is still a relatively poor country. Korea is quite a rich country. So they're very complementary. My impression is, I'm of course from neither country, but my impression is that they've had cordial relations for well over half a century. You wouldn't call them really close relations, but they're certainly cordial and well and effectively functioning relationships. Korea, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Korea's first official overseas investment was to Indonesia. I think it was around 1970, maybe late 1960s, and it was in the forestry industry. So relations are good.
And the two sides recently agreed on CEPA. In what ways would the deal affect bilateral relationship moving forward?
In terms of the CEPA, what it means, it's not clear until you really look at the fine print. A lot of these arrangements can be very deep relationships, or a lot of them can be more or less photo opportunities for the two leaders, heads of state. I think that this CEPA will probably be closer to the latter than the former. That is, it's not to say that it's not a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, but we need to see the fine print to really understand what's happening. For example, Indonesia is going through a period of fairly strong economic nationalism. That is, they're rather hesitant about opening their economy further to trade and investment. So, and President Jokowi has just announced his new cabinet because he has a 5-year term beginning about now. The trade minister the Indonesian trade minister looks to be inclined towards protectionism. So whether so-called free trade deals are going to mean much in this environment remains to be seen. Another point, of course, is a lot of Indonesia's interests externally are more to do with labour market access than they are to do with trade in goods and services. So Korea, historically, as we know, has not been very open to foreign workers, for example, unlike Hong Kong or Singapore. But as I understand it, Korea is becoming more open to foreign workers, partly because your population is aging and so on. So if the CEPA includes provisions for Indonesian workers to have access to the Korean market, that would probably be the main attraction for Indonesia, in addition to the broader strategic issues.
Lastly, could we ask for your forecast for the future of South Korea ASEAN ties after the special summit?
So ASEAN and Korea already has a trade arrangement. I'm not sure how much it's really made much impact so far. So this summit, I guess, is going to be a continuation. It's good that heads of state meet together. It's good that heads of state discuss pertinent issues. Obviously, the strategic issues are going to be very important. For Southeast Asia, a really big issue is the South China Sea and the territorial division, especially for Vietnam and the Philippines. They're very worried about the South China Sea and the possibility of serious dispute. In other respects, the relationship between South Korea and ASEAN, I think, is very close and very good. I mean, the trade is booming. There's lots of foreign investment. So, and there's lots of people movement, tourism, and so on. So I think that's all to the good. And the summit is just a useful way of continuing that process. So I don't think it means any major breakthrough, but it's just a continuation of the two sides trying to be good neighbours.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor, for your time and your expertise. We appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you and goodbye.
Coming back to you, Dr. Yi, before we wrap things up, could we ask you, Dr. Yi, how do you perceive the relationship between South Korea and ASEAN members evolving or being upgraded further in the decades to come?
Of course, I don't have a crystal ball to predict the future of Korea-ASEAN relations, but definitely one thing I can say is that our trade volume and people-to-people exchange and cultural exchange will grow further. There's a great potential for economic growth in Southeast Asia, which means that South Korea would invest more and would trade more with ASEAN countries, and as a result, we can share economic prosperity. And we will see more ASEAN nationals in South Korea, and we will find more South Korean people living and doing business in Southeast Asian countries. And maybe in the decades to come, I hope that North Korea and South Korea relation will get better, and North Korea will get denuclearized in the coming years. And if North Korea opens up, there are great role for Southeast Asia countries can do in terms of trade, investment with and in North Korea, and helping North Korea to reform its domestic governance and economy, and also making North Korea as a normal state diplomatically in the region. And Southeast Asian countries hold the key for North Korea becoming diplomatically normal country in this part of the world. And if that really happens, then there is a kind of real community among the North Korea, South Korea, and ASEAN countries could be come true.
Well, together the future looks very bright. Looks like we'll have to let you go here, Dr. Lee Jae-hyun. Thank you so much for coming in and making our program complete. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Well, many are working tirelessly to ensure a successful South Korea ASEAN Special Summit. It's more than about celebrating the past. The event is looked to help find ways to achieve co-prosperity and shared growth for the future. That's all we have for you at this hour. Do join us again same time next week for a brand new episode of The Point. Thank you for watching.